I can be heard. So welcome to the Bloomberg ASEAN Investment Summit. We are, of course, having this sustainability breakfast or round table where you will hear panelists share some perspectives around the state of things in ASEAN. And I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to maybe set the stage before the panel kicks off. So, it's been an interesting year, to say the least. So I always like to reflect on, is the glass half full or half empty, right? So if you think of the half empty perspective, there is obviously headwinds that we are facing. So if you think about export risks, ASEAN is obviously collectively big trading nations. And so, for example, if you look at approximately 10% of our exports in ASEAN go to the EU, and we know that there are regulations that have kicked in and will continue to ramp up, and that could put some risk to ASEAN's competitiveness in the years ahead if we don't act. And going a little bit more specific into a key export of Malaysia and Indonesia, if you look at palm oil, for example, linked to the EUDR regulation, there is also risk there, and that's approximately about 6 billion in annual exports. On the energy side, we are having good economic growth in large parts of ASEAN, and energy is expected to grow about close to 20% in terms of annual consumption from today to 2030. Unfortunately, more than 80% of our energy production in ASEAN is still fossil fuel linked. And so that would pose a certain degree of challenges, as many of the ASEAN countries have also committed to various pathways towards net zero. So if we don't decarbonize our factories, trace our commodities, and green our logistics, ASEAN's comparative advantage could turn into a trade disadvantage. So that's the sort of slightly negative side of things, the half-empty argument. On the half-full side, there is obviously a lot of things that we should be pleased about being in this part of the world. For example, in Malaysia, we are blessed with still pretty high forest cover. So, if you go to recent data, anything above 70% of our carbon emissions are fully absorbed by the natural cover that we have, so that's positive. And Malaysia and Indonesia hold over 18% of global nature-based carbon potential. ASEAN as a region accounts for the significant share of global nature-based solution market. This positions us as key players in the nature-based solutions with substantial opportunities for carbon markets and biodiversity projects. So earlier I talked a little bit about the state of play where we still generate our power largely with fossil fuel, but the good news is that most countries in the region have commitments to decarbonizing the grid. So we have a target of doubling that in terms of sourcing from renewable sources. So that's targeted to get to about 45% by 2030, led by countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. So there is good momentum out there. So ASEAN has significant potential to grow the investments in this green sector. Today, collectively, ASEAN spends about 1% of our GDP in the green sector. China spends about 4% of its GDP, and I guess we've all heard and seen various stories about how quickly the transition is happening there. If you just look at mobility, etc., etc. So governments are acting too. Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand have committed towards the ASEAN carbon credit framework to link regional carbon markets. Efforts to introduce carbon pricing or tax are being implemented as well. And the private sector is stepping up too. Banks, investors, and corporates are channeling billions into green infrastructure, sustainable bonds, and nature-positive projects. So yes, the challenge is real. It's not a straight line. If you think of the momentum, many of us and the speakers will obviously share their perspectives. We've started this journey many years ago. thinking that everyone will be exactly on the same pathway and move at pace. And the reality is it's not a perfect straight line. We do face some challenges. So really the question isn't whether ASEAN can lead, but how fast we can act together to turn our strengths into our greatest advantage. So maybe just a couple of minutes on CIMB. So obviously we have stepped up. So about 5 years ago, we went in a very focused manner to develop our sustainability posture and agenda. We have since committed 300 billion to mobilize sustainable finance across leading up to 2030. I'm pleased to say that at various checkpoints we've had, we started obviously with lower targets, and at various checkpoints we had raised that bar, and that's really credit to the ecosystem around us, whether it's the regulators, whether it's the companies, etc. That there is clear momentum and interest to drive this. So how do we effect change, and how do we work with clients? It's really around the three things that you see on the screen. So one is really green and social finance. So this is where the use of proceeds that we deploy with our clients has a clear focus on green or transitioning, etc. So for example, we are an active financier in the EV ecosystem in Indonesia. In Malaysia, we've worked on some of the rail and electrified rail networks, and that's all part of the journey towards driving or deploying capital to where it matters. In the second bucket, in terms of what we call sustainability-linked loans, so this is where we link metrics that the clients commit to in order to translate to better terms on our financing. So for example, we have deployed over 1 billion ringgit to a large plantation company in Malaysia, where we have worked on reducing carbon intensity by 50% and also increased traceability by over 200% in terms of the fresh fruit bunch. And finally, on advisory. So this is interesting because if you think about it, the larger companies obviously have good sustainability teams and units and chief sustainability officers, but as you work down the size of companies and you get into the SME sectors, that tends to get a lot more challenging. So we came up with a product called Green Biz Ready, where we work with SMEs to essentially handhold them through this journey. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit around the export network and risk. So for example, one particular SME, we worked with them to essentially show the pathway to reduce their intensity by 43%, their scope 2 levels by 43%. And so working with us through our financing, they then establish that, and that allows them the ability to provide proof and respond to their buyers within the MNC ecosystem globally, so that they can then sustain their competitiveness and also grow market opportunities. So, in conclusion, we feel that, as I mentioned, the journey is not one of a straight path. There are many things that we will need to do. So in facilitating the business side that I mentioned, we also, of course, watch our portfolio. So we are the first bank to essentially release sector decarbonization pathways for our 6 highest emitting sectors, which contribute about 60% of our finance emissions. So that's well underway, it's being tracked, and we are certainly deploying additional amounts of financing to greener opportunities, etc. So we look forward to working with all our clients, solution partners, regulators, to keep this agenda firmly in place and make progress such that Malaysia and ASEAN grow its resiliency and attractiveness as a future-proof destination for businesses and our global trade partners. So thank you very much, and over to the panel.